மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.
Here, white played knight c4, trying to chase away my queen. So the queen just retreated to c7. King b1, rook to d8, as we discussed. Now, white played queen e2 to get out of the pin, and here came c5. Very natural pawn break, trying to open up this c file to attack white's king. And I want to show you a couple more moves from this game because I believe I used a pretty instructive idea here. Rook h4 was played, a little bit of a weird looking move, but actually not that unusual in this variation. White is simply trying to bolster his center with this move. Rook to c8, again, black's position plays itself. Knight to e3, and here's the interesting idea I was alluding to. I played the move knight b6, knight e4, captures, captures, and now c4. Bypassing the central tension, I'm aiming to play the move c3, and white was forced to play c3 himself. Now came knight d5, this sort of artificial outpost on the d5 square. Excuse me, I actually played the move queen to c6 first here. Now, white played knight g4, and after knight d5, I really like my position here. These pawns here are going to be quite exposing white's light squares. This queen is ready to go to a4, and also they both provide very nice hooks for this pawn advance. But unfortunately, in this position, the game ended in a draw. And I say unfortunately because a draw actually gave me first place in the tournament, which is very important for me to secure the title. However, I really like my position. I would play it any other occasion, but here had to be pragmatic, take the money prize, take the championship, and call it a day. But again, I want to just bring your attention to this idea of pushing this pawn to c4 and making an outpost on d5, very kind of similar to how we saw with b5, except here we're getting rid of the c4 possibility altogether and then launching an attack. So this brings me again back to bishop b4, this position here. This position we're going to be looking at knight to e4, which is a move that I've actually used myself and have faced quite a bit as well. Again, this whole variation of bishop f4, bishop d2 is not as popular today as it was before, but still important to know, especially because the best move for black here is not that easy to find if you don't know it. It's the move knight f6, allowing white to play knight d6 check, king e7, misplacing this king on e7, but it turns out that in this variation, black is very alright. We're getting a lot of tempo for development. These rooks are going to be coming in very quickly here. And this king on e7 is going to be quite safe. And we'll see in a lot of positions the king is simply going to retreat to the king side. And there's really nothing that white can do about it. However, it does look scary to play this variation if you haven't seen it before. So we're going to cover two options here. The move knight takes b7, winning a pawn temporarily, and knight c4. So let's start with the move knight takes b7. Again, white's play is looking aggressive here. He's misplaced our king. He was won a pawn. But actually, this variation at the end of the complications is not that good for white. After bishop takes b2, bishop takes d2, knight takes d2. Very accurate move here. Queen b4, attacking the knight, preventing this queen a3 check. You have to be careful. For example, queen b6, queen a3 is going to be quite troublesome for this king. Queen b4 here, very strong move. And actually, this knight on b7 is close to being trapped. Of course, white can play knight c5, but after the simple exchange on c5, and now probably rook d8 looks very strong here, or even the simple queen takes c5. Black's position is very fine. All these open files for his rooks are going to be quite handy. So white is advised to play queen b3 here, defending this knight. Now queen takes d4 is best, just getting this pawn back. White should castle long here, trying to get some sort of initiative. This rook hitting this queen potentially through an x-ray. However, there's nothing to fear in this position at all after the move rook a b8, creating a pin on this knight and potentially preparing the move queen to b6. White generally plays queen a3 here, getting out of the pin with tempo. But again, nothing scary at all here. c5, calmly blocking it. If this knight ever moves, we have queen f4 check, so no fear there. Knight is hanging, so knight a5, threatening a nasty fork. However, naturally developing and defending against the fork is quite alright for black. And I've actually reached this position twice with the white pieces. And funnily enough, I've actually done quite well from this position. However, this was not as a result of the opening. Now, this position is perfectly alright for black. These rooks are very active. We're aiming at white's king. This queen on d4 is both, it can be a liability, of course. That's what white's hoping for. But honestly, this queen is quite active, targeting this pawn on b2. Can always run away to f4. For example, after knight to c4 check, the simple queen f4 will suffice, where we can continue later on with knight b6, or even simpler king f8, king g8. Again, no problems at all with black's position here. Very active attacking game on the queen side. And I've played this move f3 here before, against which I think the simplest option for black is just queen b4. Get these queens off the board. The king on e7 is going to be very, very active in the endgame. And here I played a game against a grandmaster who was white. That game ended in a draw. However, after queen exchange, knight to c4, rook b5, black was very active, already targeting this pawn, and also having very strong pressure on the queen side here. The knights can easily jump into the game and create all sorts of trouble. And in the end, I drew this game, but only after 100-something moves. So this knight takes b7 option here is looking very aggressive, but not really giving white anything beneficial. White just isn't well placed enough to take advantage of this king on e7. A better move, in my opinion, is the move knight to c4. Not getting involved in those complications, taking the pawn, just retreating the knight and targeting this queen on a5. And this is a move that I've faced a couple of times, and also a move that I've actually played as well. And again, the story here is quite similar with the knight b7 variation. This king on e7 looks like looks like there may be trouble, but there's actually no trouble at all. So here the best option is to go bishop takes d2, knight takes d2, and now this queen can just roll back to c7. So again, the plan here is very simple for black. We're just going to play rook d8, rook c8, and then the king is going to calmly walk away, and we're ready for all our b5 and c5 ideas and attack white on the queen side. So I'd like to quickly show a game here that I played some years ago, and a very instructive game, I think, and also just shows all the ideas we've been talking about. White plays this move, queen a3, trying to create an initiative against the king. However, after c5, there's just not enough firepower here. White castles long, brings the rook into the game, brings the king to safety. Black does the same, rook h to d8. Again, as I already mentioned, the plan here is quite simple. Given the opportunity, I will simply retreat my king away and enjoy a very nice position. White tries to create more problems. Knight b3 attacking c5, b6, very simple defense. So again, as I've been stressing, here white just does not have enough firepower to take advantage of this king on e7. And this game is a really good example of what could happen if white starts trying too hard to make something happen. So in the game, pawn takes c5 was played. Now I have a couple options here. I could simply take with the knight, but I was feeling in a bit of a combative mood, and I played b takes c5, keeping the pieces on the board and opening up the b file for my rooks, really trying to get some sort of attack. So white tries to be very aggressive here with this move, knight d4. Looks very strong, looks very fancy because of this pin. However, there's just no threat. So I go king f8 running away. King b1 is played so that this queen on f4 check isn't the problem. Now I simply play rook to d8, rather rook d to b8. Now the knight on a d4 really is hanging, so white plays knight f3. This king is now safe, no danger at all. Turns out that white's king may be in a little bit of danger. I play the move rook to b4, queen d3, knight to b6, and now white is really facing some tough questions. For example, after knight takes b6, can simply continue. I think every single recapture is good here. AB opens up another line towards white's king and also fixes my pawn islands. And of course, taking with the rook, just simply preparing to double and maybe threatening the move c4, c3. Again, very difficult position for white here. White tries to maintain this knight on c4, that's playing quite good defense here. Plays knight e5, captures, queen f4, double attack on f2 and c4, and rook b8, knight d5, lots of good moves at black's disposal here. White decides, okay, I'm not going to try to exploit that king on f8 anymore, I gotta worry about my own king. Plays queen to d6, trying to exchange the queens. However, in this position, black's initiative is still very potent. Rook d8, now this knight is actually short of squares, and I'm threatening knight d5, trapping this knight on d6, and also going for some knight c3 ideas because of this pin. So, white played c4, trying to stop that. King e7, a3, rook a4, keeping an eye on the c4 pawn. And the game had a nice finish I'll go through very quickly. Knight b7, knight c5, rook c4. Again, the initiative persists in the endgame. These two rooks just harassing white's queen side. White plays knight d3, now rook b5. So I'm targeting this pawn on h5. As I've alluded to, can be quite weak in many of these endgames. Knight b4, a5, knight c2. White is just completely at loss for what to do. I completely ignore this pawn. Knight e4, double attack for c3. My opponent tries to solve these problems via tactical idea, knight d4. However, after knight c3 check, king a1, knight takes d1, knight takes b5. One move saves the whole day for me. Of course, knight f2 is a free pawn, but rook c1, king a2, knight c3 is a whole free exchange. And, of course, white just resigned here. So, went through that whole game. I think just going through this game is going to arm you forever for how to face this variation here. We already have the arrows drawn here. Simply just want to bring our rooks to the central files. The king can run away. And in the game, my opponent really tried to make something happen against my position here. However, way too solid. His pawn at c5 is very strong, controls the center, gives me some possibilities on the queen side. Rook to b8 is coming, and a finish here that was quite fitting considering that I crashed through on the queen side. So that is actually going back to e6, bishop f4. That is all we really need to know about this bishop f4 move. Again, queen a5 check, bishop d2, bishop b4. Knight e4 is not dangerous. We just allow this to displace our king, and then we proceed to consolidate by bringing our rooks to the center. Of course, the main option that you'll most likely face here, and in my experience of facing this a lot, is when white gets his pawn to c4. However, knowing this plan with b5 is just sufficient to get a good position with black and get a good game. Knowing the ideas how we want to remove this pawn knowing that we want to get rid of the c4 pawn. Now, actually, there's one more option here that I just remembered that I should mention, and the reason that I actually forgot is because in all my years, in all my hundreds and hundreds of games of facing this variation, I've actually never had this move played against me. I've memorized what to do against it a long time ago, but I don't actually have any experience with it, and that is the move d5 in this position, where white tries to blow open the center and tries to take advantage of the central duo, and unfortunately, it doesn't work for white here because his pieces are just not ready to go on this offensive. Now, the only rule that I remember all these years is that this pawn in e6 needs to stay on e6, because white's whole hope here is that we're going to trade all these pawns off and allow this knight on g3, this massive f5 square, where he's going to be unassailable and exert tremendous pressure on our position. So the only thing black needs to remember is to play pawn d5, and now queen to d6, pinning this pawn. And the follow-up here is quite simple. Again, don't take with this pawn on d5. That's all you need to remember. We're going to play the move knight to f6. So I believe white's best move here is queen b3, getting out of this pin. He wants us to take this pawn. He's even willing to sacrifice it to get a knight to f5. No, sir. Knight f6 here gives black a very, very nice position. All of white's moves have basically been premature here. Again, the line runs here. Pawn takes, pawn takes. And in this position, again, we've prevented knight f5, and black's play is very active here. There's all sorts of ideas here. Of course, this pawn on h5 is always loose. Rook c8 is an easy idea, get the rook to the open files. Knight c5, knight d3 is on the agenda. The knight can also go to d5 here. And this pawn on e6 looks like a weak pawn, but simply just not possible to really target. Can be very easily defended with king f7. So this pawn d5 push, absolutely nothing to fear here. So now we're going to go back and focus really on the meat of this chapter, and in terms of course, the dangers, and that is the move bishop to d2, not allowing us to play queen to a5. Now, the reason this move bishop d2 is so critical is because white avoids this weakening move with c4, which is, as we saw in the previous section here, that is a major source of counterplay when we're castling short. So this is why this move is quite venomous, and we're going to jump straight into the main line here and see why I believe this move is, so, and not just me, but modern chess, why most players have started to prefer this way. So now we're playing knight f6, castles, bishop to e7, preparing to castle short. Again, here we don't have that same option of playing b5 and attacking this pawn on c4, but we will be mostly focusing on attacking with our pieces, and we also have this pawn break c5 to potentially open up this c-file and put pressure on white's position. White's best move here that we're going to look at first is king to b1, this very subtle idea, king b1. And the whole point here is that, well, it's well known that in these long castling positions, the king is often better placed on b1 than c1, away from c-file shenanigans, away from any potential checks. But here it also has a very important idea of defending the a2 pawn. As we'll see, when this queen gets to d5 and targets a2, white is already prepared for that. King b1, castles. Now knight e4, this is a very standard idea for white. He wants to get rid of this knight from g3 to e4 because he wants to have the very dangerous plan of pushing the g-pawn down the board. And
மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.